The river looked harmless at dawn, a gray ribbon bending around two low domes and a forest of white pipes. Inside one of those domes at 3 Mile Island, night shift operators poured coffee and watched 1,000,000 pounds of water hold a small, obedient star inside a steel pot. Control boards spread across the room like a nighttime city. Hundreds of lights, needles, switches, annunciators, all behaving. Steam hissed, turbines purred, and numbers marched in order. It was the kind of routine that makes you forget what the machines are capable of when routine ends. Just before 4 a.m., the plant's giant teapot stumbled. A hiccup in the water treatment system starved the feedwater pumps on the secondary side. No feedwater meant no steam. No steam. The turbine tripped. A tripped turbine drove an automatic reactor scram. That part worked perfectly. Control rods drove down. Fission slowed. But you never turn off a hot star the way you turn off a lamp. Decay heat keeps boiling the pot, and every pipe and valve in the cooling chain must behave in sequence. At the top of the pressurizer, a tall steel vessel that smooths pressure swings, a relief valve popped to bleed off excess. It should have slammed shut after a breath. It didn't. The indicator light on the control board reported power to the valve, not the actual position of the plug. The light went off, which meant coil de-energized, and the crew read it as valve shut. In reality, the valve hung open like a stuck mouth, quietly venting scalding coolant into a tank never meant to drink that much. Around the board, alarms multiplied until they sounded like a crowd in a station. So many voices that the most important voice could not be heard. As water slipped away, the reactor coolant became a froth, part liquid, part steam. Up at the pressurizer, the level climbed. Training said, high level means too full, so operators throttled emergency injection to push that level down. They did not yet know the level at the top was lying about the truth below. Most of the core sits far under the pressurizer. High up top did not mean covered below. In the core region, fuel rods began to peak from water like hot stones at the bottom of a kettle. Zirconium cladding overheated, grabbed oxygen from steam, and made hydrogen. Bits of fuel slumped and deformed. The phrase partial meltdown had not yet attached itself to this morning, but its chemistry had begun. Sunrise brought managers and regulators, phones warmed, early statements walked a tightrope between bland and worried. Some radioactive gases were vented to the stack, allowed by emergency rules, terrifying to imagine. Parents sent kids to school and then turned around when rumors outran buses. Reporters who couldn't tell a pressurizer from a pressure cooker sprinted to the fence line and pointed microphones like divining rods. Mid-morning, an operator proved the stuck-open valve. The pathway that had been bleeding the patient was finally choked off. Temperatures bent downward, pressures steadied, then wobbled again. The core had been uncovered long enough to be hurt. Hydrogen pooled inside the containment building like a trapped balloon. 2 words escaped into America's bloodstream: hydrogen bubble. Would it burn? Could it explode? One team said there wasn't enough oxygen inside containment to feed a flame. Another warned that if oxygen leaked in, a spark could kick the building like a mule. The governor asked pregnant women and small children within 5 miles to leave as a precaution. Highways filled with station wagons packed for 2 kinds of trips at once, a picnic and an exile. Inside, the plant punished clumsy moves. Reactor coolant pumps hated steam. Bearings screamed and tripped when the mix got wrong. If the crew slowed injection to protect the pumps, temperatures and radiation spikes crept upward, and instruments lied in fresh voices. Protective logic tripped new alarms. The boards glowed with a Christmas no one had ordered. Competent men, tired and human, tried to steer a ship whose compass had decided to be poetic. County planners dusted off binders and checked potassium iodide tablets. School superintendents sent children home. Churches kept lights on. DJs took calls from truckers who swore the air tasted like pennies. At the grocery, someone quietly bought all the milk and batteries. The words, nuclear accident, which had lived for years in the safe, hypothetical future, arrived at room temperature and sat in the kitchen. Day 2 belonged to the bubble. Experts argued oxygen content, geometry, kinetics, the patience of the gas. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission tried to orchestrate truths arriving out of tune from the utility, the control room, the labs, the governor's office. Reporters repeated acronyms until they sounded like prayers. Faith wanted a face, and it got one. The president came. Jimmy Carter, a former nuclear engineer, walked the turbine hall in a yellow hard hat and told the country the situation was serious but manageable. The picture steadied nerves. It did not cool metal. Crews bled hydrogen, measured, bled again. Cooling paths improved as people learned, hour by hour, what the plant would tolerate. Radiation releases dwindled into trace. The worst nightmare, an explosion that breached containment, never arrived. The river slid past the island, gray and blank, as if innocence were a current you could ride out of anything. The evacuation advisory for the most vulnerable held a while longer and then eased. The emergency remained an emergency without becoming a catastrophe. The bill came later, and it was paid in years. Cleanup crews in layered plastic and robots with clumsy hands cut a ruined heart into pieces that could be lifted, casked, and sent west to Idaho. Steel sermons about humility. Unit 1, the undamaged reactor next door, sat in political limbo while neighbors, lawyers, and regulators argued about trust, then returned to service under a harder gaze. The industry swallowed lessons written in hot metal and human habit and rewrote itself. Make instruments say what valves actually do, not what their wires intend them to do. Thin the blizzard of alarms so the urgent isn't drowned by the merely noisy. Train on the weird. Steam where water should be, numbers that lie, symptoms instead of tidy causes. Write procedures that follow what the plant feels, not what the drawing assumed. Map evacuation lines with school buses and apologies before anyone needs them. And build a stern pier, the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, to shame plants into excellence even when regulators are satisfied, because punishment is slow and pride is fast. Public memory did its own chemistry. A thriller about a fictional nuclear mishap had opened days earlier. Its tagline and the island's name fused into opinion. Protesters marched easily. Advocates carried other numbers, no deaths from radiation, tiny doses off-site, containment held. Both truths mattered. What mattered most was the feeling that a machine designed to keep its dangers caged had let the cage rattle in living rooms for days. Faith, it turned out, is part of engineering. Humility, too. Years later, the domes still rise from the river bend. Unit 1 finished its life unglamorous and closely watched. Unit 2 remains shut, a teacher that never stops the same lecture. Routine is a disguise, and small lies can travel far wearing trustworthy lights. In control rooms across the country, operators stand in cleaner layouts with fewer alarms, deeper simulators, and a practiced suspicion of the ordinary. County planners run drills that end with relief instead of embarrassment. Governors ask for facts in sentences regular people can carry. People remember in household ways. They kept salt and batteries by the sink for a while. Some packed photo albums and cereal, drove north until the radio said stop, and came home past fields that looked exactly the same and somehow didn't. A father explains to a daughter that a single stuck valve and a handful of human guesses taught a country to listen harder to complicated machines. An engineer tells an intern that numbers without context are gossip. A sheriff's deputy redraws evacuation arrows 5 times in 1 hour and then sits on a cruiser bumper and cries where no one can see. 3 Mile Island remains less a place than a curriculum. It says close isn't safe, clever isn't humble, and it can't happen here is not a plan. It says the river will always look harmless at dawn. People will always pour coffee. Panels will glow, and someone will ask, perfectly reasonably, how bad it could get. After that week, the right answer is never delivered lightly. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.